more proud of that picture, I guess, than any picture I ever made, because I took an actual happening out of the Civil War, out of the history book, and I told it in detail, too. The Northerners coming in there as civilians and stealing that engine with the intent of burning bridges behind them.
The look of the film was based on Civil War photographs of Matthew Brady. Keaton told his crew, "Make it so authentic it hurts." The location was Oregon. Southern railroads were too crowded.
We bought engines up there, and with very little work, remodeled them into Civil War engines. Then we built a passenger train and a freight train on their flat cars. They had the rolling stock for us. And all the track in the world we wanted to use was already laid for us.
To Cottage Grove came 17 carloads of equipment, much of it to create this set of Marietta, Georgia. As director, Keaton was in complete control. He recreated the period so carefully that for many modern audiences, this is the Civil War brought to life. The Northern Raiders steal Buster's train and kidnap his girl, Annabelle, with Buster in hot pursuit. But he needs something more powerful than a handcar. With another engine, he discovers it.
We found that as an actual gun of the Civil War, the first railroad gun. And we duplicated that cannon. It almost looks like a prop we invented. That's the only thing that kind of scared us when a company used it. It says everybody's going to say, oh, they invented the prop just to get the gag.
The idea was to show Buster's attempts to shell the raiders on the move. Every shot had to be filmed on the move, too. But Keaton was a master of the traveling shot. Cameras were mounted on cars, themselves often mounted on railroad flat cars. This amateur film gives a rare glimpse of Keaton directing. Two locomotives run side by side on double tracks, one pulling the camera train. The cannon has to fire its first round straight into the cab, a joke with real gunpowder.
He said, the only thing that saved our lives in that was a pair of tweezers. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the first time we loaded the cannon, we only wanted the cannonball to just go and land into the engine cab. And he said, the first time we did it, it was a good thing we was going around the curve, because it went whango and it missed the car completely and landed over in a field someplace. So then we put in a little bit less, and it still went too far. He said, we finally wound up pushing the kernels of the gunpowder aside and just counting kernels into the thing. Finally got it so that when it went off, why...
Desperate to stop the raiders, Buster uses a full barrel load of powder. There was no rush on a Keaton picture. He could relax between scenes, although he looks distinctly ill at ease here, posing with the amateur photographer's wife. But you had to play baseball to work with Keaton. He'd pick up a bat at the slightest excuse and in the most unlikely places. Working without a script, Keaton liked to shoot rehearsals, as Marion Mack discovered to her cost.
When I went out that morning, I was made up and all ready to work. And I didn't know that they were going to make a scene with the water spout aimed for me, that when the train would stop, they would let me have it. But they didn't tell me they're going to do this. So the scene you see in the movie, that was quite a surprise. And I was pretty angry about it. So I let them have it.
For the Battle of Rock River, Keaton used the Oregon National Guard.
We had to have artillery pieces, army saddles and stuff like that, and uniforms for both gray and blue. With 500 men up there, I could house them for a week and put them in gray uniforms and bring them going from right to left, and take them out, put them in blue uniforms, bring them going from left to right, and fought the war.
They issued no shoes. You had no shoes, but each guy was counted out with his uniform.
An 18-year-old private in the Oregon National Guard was John Wilson.
I do recall, though, that we had lots of caps, and we had, but the uniforms, we had about 200 of the gray and about 300 or so of the blue, and not enough to make distribution on it.
They treated us as like we were in a regular army. They had us come to attention and measure off our distance, and then they had us number off, and they gave us all our directions and what we were supposed to do, and expected us to carry it out.
The location was at Culp Creek, where a full-sized railroad bridge had been built, simply to be destroyed.
I felled the timber that made the bridge across the river to put the locomotive down. We was working for this contractor. George Potter had the job of putting a tree to build a bridge across the river that they used for that scene. 300 feet, 400 feet from here, we're across the river, and it was built. And they tried it out 3 or 4 times and put the locomotive across it so that they see how it worked before they cut it so it would fall in the creek. It was about 70 feet long across one bluff to the other.
As Jack Little's powder men laid the last of their dynamite, people came from Cottage Grove and all over the state.
I had the measles at the time, and I wasn't allowed out too much. And this was such a spectacular thing that my father says, you can't miss it, you can't miss it. It's just a one-shot deal. And so my mother decided to take me, spots and all, and I wasn't the only one with spots there either. It was quite an epidemic.
With the bridge alight, Keaton set in motion the most expensive single shot of the entire silent era. People in the crowd screamed. Someone was on that engine.
It had a white shirt as well as I remember, and a vest, and his cap.
By enlarging the frame, we can see what alarmed the crowd.
One of the ladies fainted because this dummy leaned forward, and we all thought it looked like a real person in there. And when the train went down then, it had a whistle on it, a very shrill whistle. It was kind of a mournful thing, and everybody felt like something really had happened that was really dreadful.
The battle was covered by 6 cameras.
It was very exciting and a little bit alarming because there were shells going off, and they had explosions going off, and they blew parts of trees to pieces, and the horses had riders on them that weren't the greatest riders in the world, and some of them were falling off, and I know it was kind of scary as far as I was concerned.
But the funny part, going down the hill, I happened to be a little bit in the rear, and they had stakes out there where they had smoke bombs or explosives of some kind, and someone had I've forgotten how they designated who would die and who wouldn't. But somebody would fall by this stake, and he'd look at that stake, and he'd get up and he'd crawl like the devil to get away from it.
There were some of them would be thrown off of the cannons, and the horses was running wild, and they'd get run over, and it was next thing to a war.
And they had it dammed at this end to make more water. And it was supposed to be wadeable, but it wasn't.
Water wasn't just knee deep, it went clear over my head. They said it was 18, 20 feet deep, the hole where I stepped into. And I swam. The water was much more of a river here. And I turned around, I swam right back out into the big hole. And there's where I went down 3 times.
I don't know how many of them almost drowned in there. We kept pulling them out for 10 minutes, I guess.
Keaton was ultimately responsible for everything that happened, but he shared the risks. 9 men had been injured, several by explosions.
One of them was too close to Buster Keaton, and it knocked him over and knocked him unconscious. And he lay there on the ground for quite some time unconscious. They finally brought him to, and he rested up a while and got back on the job.
Then the unbelievable happened. Like one Keaton climax topped by another, sparks from the engine set fire to tinder-dry forest. Every man was rushed to the scene.
And there was a lot of young fellows that was there that had no experience whatsoever in fighting a fire. Well, they thought all you had to do was just go up there and start in and fight it. And Buster himself, he took his pants off, and he was as fresh with these pants.
He'd been fighting the fire with these pants while the rest of the men had been using their uniforms. So he would run around in long shorts with his back down. And at that time he had a pitchfork, and he was sneaking up on a little puff of smoke and putting it out. And of course everybody was just hilarious.
They got the fire out with no trouble, but there was so much smoke that they couldn't shoot. And they had to wait for a rain to come and clear out the smoke, when that could be up to 6 weeks or 7 weeks or whenever. So they had to pack the whole thing in and come back to LA and wait for a rain. And then when they finally got a rainstorm and that cleared the smoke out, then they went back up and finished the picture. So that drove the budget up considerably.
Keaton was already wildly over budget, but he had produced what he and his associates were convinced was his masterpiece. Modern audiences agree, but when the film opened in New York, reviews were mixed. A few were positive, but the New York Times said, "This is by no means as good as Mr. Keaton's previous efforts." Variety, "The General is far from funny." Life magazine, "Many of his gags are in gruesomely bad taste." Keaton's favorite picture did not cover its costs. Schenck insisted that in future he work with a production supervisor.